So like I said, doing top 10 point guards. We're doing it based on what they did last season. We're doing a tier list because I think I like the visualization that a tier list provides, but I also, if a guy's, I had the tier list in such a way you'll see when I do it that I think some of these tiers are a little interchangeable in terms of the guys that I have in these tiers. So it's not just a straight 1 through 10. There might be a 2, 3 section, a 4 or 5 section, stuff like that. Because I think, especially when it comes to the point guards, honestly, a lot of these positions, and I'm already struggling looking at my other list for the other positions, but when it comes to a lot of these positions, I think the talent in certain ranges is very interchangeable. Like that 10 to 7, 10 to 6, I won't say I struggled with, but I definitely spent more time on 10 to 6 than I did 1 to 4. I'll say that, because 1 to 4 to me was a little more solidified than 10 through 6. But without further ado, let's get into my top 10 point guards in the NBA based on what they did last season. I want to say 12 or 13 point guards down here. This was just me. The way I do it, I typically look at the NBA standings. I just pull up a list of the standings and kind of go from there on who I think should be in the list and just jot down names. I kind of put them in an area where I think off the top of my head where they should or should not be in terms of ranking them very loosely. And then I'll start to get some nitty gritty, spend some time on Basketball Reference, spend some time on B-Ball Index. Shoot, for a couple of these guys, I even pulled up some YouTube clips because I was like, I need to get a reminder or feel of what their game looks like in terms of where they score from or what their assists, what their passing style looks like. Because for some of these guys, let's be real, some of these guys we haven't seen since, like Trae Young, I ain't seen since May. Like some of these guys we just simply haven't seen in a while. Luka, I haven't seen since May outside of some FIBA stuff recently the last couple of weeks. But in terms of NBA play, some of these guys we haven't seen in a while, or at least I haven't seen in a while in a couple of months. So all that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. Let me check one last thing. I'm gonna alert Discord real quick so they know what's in here. And then we're gonna go ahead and get it popping. All right, so I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. We're gonna start with top 10. I was gonna do some honorable mentions first, but I'm gonna leave some of the suspense because once we get past 10 to 8-ish, I'll go back and talk about why the honorable mentions are there because it'll be pretty obvious at that point. At number 10 is where I have Jrue Holiday. For me, Jrue Holiday, I think he was a little higher on my list last year. And I was contemplating back and forth if he was going to make this list. When it comes to how I look at players, I'm a guy who really values two-way play. Like I talk about all the time. If you're a two-way guy, I typically will value over a guy who does something similar to you offensively, but you're a better defender. I'm going to give you the nod. That's just how I value basketball. Probably because defense was, when I first started hooping, defense was the only thing I was good at. And if I probably hoop right now, defense, I'd probably be trash. But anyway, Jrue Holiday this season, the word that comes to mind for him, 2 things I wrote down was all around consistent. Jrue Holiday did a lot for the Milwaukee Bucks this season, whether it was his catch and shoot game, his ability to score off the dribble, his ability to play make a little bit. Defensively and around the league, he's still known as, if not the best, top 3 perimeter defenders when it comes to guard play or just guarding people on the perimeter in general. He's one of the best, if not the best in the league still. And he's been that for a couple of seasons. He was an all-star last year, first all-star in at least 5 years, I want to say. Like, it's been a while since Jrue Holiday's been an all-star. And I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to Jrue and putting him on here, and yeah, he's only at 10. There was a couple of guys that almost took the spot for him. The Milwaukee Bucks were dealing with Chris Middleton still in and out of the lineup throughout the season. There was a lot of just, not necessarily the injury bug in terms of the whole team was injured, but Chris Middleton is so much for that team. Him being in and out of lineup drastically changes how they play. And Jrue was just consistent all season long for them. He was consistent all season long. And that's one thing that I would say, I feel like in years past, a conversation that's been swirling around Jrue is his lack of consistency on the offensive side of the ball. Like some days you don't know what Jrue game you're going to get. One game you're going to get like 18, 20 from Jrue, and the next game you're going to get 14, 12 from Jrue. This year it felt just more consistent for me. So shout out to Jrue Holiday. He's at the 10 spot. I went back and forth with this guy a lot. I'm gonna keep it a bean. He almost did not make my list. But if I'm being honest, if I'm being objective, if I'm being just honest with myself, for me, Kyrie's number 9. And now I think Kyrie's skill set and skill level has the ability to range, I'm gonna be honest, anywhere from like 4 to 12, depending on what you value and how you look at Kyrie. Because it's the off-season whirlwind, I guess you could say, that is Kyrie. Winning a trade, getting out of Brooklyn, ending up in Dallas. And Dallas low-key goes on a losing streak once he gets there, but he's playing crazy efficient alongside Luka. At the end of the day, when I'm just looking at Kyrie as a basketball player and what he does on the court, it's no doubt in my mind that Kyrie's a top 10 point guard. Almost finished the season 50, 40, 90. He was a couple percentage points off on the field goal and the free throw. It was like 48% and 89%, but basically almost 50, 40, 90. He was over 50% from the field in his 20 games he had in Dallas. And you know what's crazy, Ant-Man? I'm not mad at you saying Kyrie shouldn't be on the list in your opinion. I'll explain how he made it in a second once get the number 8, and then I'll talk about who my honorable mentions are, because like I said, it'll be kind of obvious. But for me, Kyrie still makes the list because when I watch how he plays, alongside Luka this season, and when I watch how he played as when he was still point guard, playing alongside Kevin Durant, he was phenomenal. Like, watching Kyrie Irving is, I hate to use the cliche of poetry in motion, but it truly is poetry in motion. Ability to score at all 3 levels, the ability to do that like stupid efficiently. Kyrie's low-key one of the most efficient players in the league. I don't know if it gets talked about, but it don't get talked about at the same time because he's not at least in the last year or so, maybe that's due to the personnel he's played with, he's not necessarily the volume scorer as some of the other super efficient guys are. Like we talked about Kevin Durant, how super efficient he is, but he's scoring at a higher volume than Kyrie is. So I think that's why it's highlighted a little bit more on a guy like Kevin Durant as opposed to a guy like Kyrie. But Kyrie does squeak in and make my list. Shout out to Kyrie. At number 8, this is where I have one of my favorite point guards. I don't know how Kyrie does his handle because my arms and legs are gone after what he does. Exactly. Kyrie is poetry in motion. He puts the ball on the spring. He can get to where he wants to get in space. He literally can score at all 3 levels on the court. His 3-ball isn't as deep as some of the other point guards on this list. Like, he does not known for taking crazy deep threes, but when the threes he takes, he's wildly efficient on. At number 8, this is where I have one of my favorite point guards on this list. Out of all the point guards on this list, Tyrese Halliburton is one of my favorites. And having him at 8, if he didn't get injured, he probably would be higher on my list. If he didn't end up with injured, he might be higher on my list. What he had the Pacers looking like pre and post injury was 2 absolutely different teams. He had Miles Turner have his best offensive season of his career, in my opinion. He orchestrates a beautiful offense. He plays with a really good pace, getting that young team up and down the court quickly. It's funny. He recently was talking about when he's talking, I don't remember who he was interviewing with, or if I read an article and it's just a snippet from the interview was in an article. I don't know if it was a full video or not, so I don't have all the context. But essentially, he was talking about the difference between being the point guard for the Pacers and being the point guard for Team USA. He's like, with the Pacers, we getting out on the floor, we running, like I'm outletting, we getting up and down the court, we going. So Team USA plays at a slightly slower pace. We're trying to get into some sets. We're trying to actually run some stuff. So it's interesting seeing him as I'm watching. I'll be honest, I feel like I haven't watched a full FIBA game yet. It's just been a lot of highlights for me. But as I'm watching these highlights and seeing just how he's adapting his game is just really impressive to me. It's one of my opinion, low key, one of the best playmakers in the league, like top 4, top 5 playmakers. Like, he's solidifying himself in that upper echelon of playmakers. And for that, to me at least, he's deservedly top 10 point guard on this list. And yes, Ant-Man, I agree. I also really do not wish he didn't get injured, because he was hooping before the injury. He was hooping. The Pacers were hooping. Pacers were rolling. Call me crazy. If he doesn't get injured, I think the Pacers, because what did they end? I want to say they ended outside the play-in last season. I could be tripping. So let's look it up. But I want to say he ended outside the play-in. Well, excuse me. I want to say the Pacers ended outside the play-in. Pacers last season were, let me just pull this up. Yes, I'm saying they were in the play-in with him, but they lost so many games to end the season once he got out of injury. They lost so many. Like, look, last 10 games, they were 3 for 7. Like, with him, the Pacers are rolling. They're definitely a play-in team. 100% a play-in team if he's healthy. But they just shoot. They were rolling so much, like, they would have been battling for, like, that 6th seed if he was healthy. It just didn't work out for him, unfortunately. I'm looking forward to him next season. Looking forward to what the Pacers continue to do, because they got a really good team there, and he's a really, really good point guard. Before we move on to number 6 and 7, I guess this makes it kind of obvious where, well, actually, it don't. So some of the honorable mentions so far that we're just not having, but I felt like they were having a good season. I just don't have them on my list. And right now, I'll just say that's LaMelo Ball. I meant to download his picture. Yeah, LaMelo Ball's not on my list. He's an honorable mention. Darius Garland's not my list. He's an honorable mention. I think both of them had a really, really good season. LaMelo Ball's not on my list because he only played 30 games. Like, injury just took him out the list altogether. If he played more games, we'll see. I think Darius Garland would have been in the mix, and if you swap him out for, like, Ant-Man, you said Kyrie, you don't want Kyrie. I'm not mad if you swap Ant-Man if you swap Darius Garland for any of these bottom 3 players. I'm not mad at it at all. But at number 7, that is where I have Jamal Murray. I said at the beginning of this that this is based off the regular season, and there will be very, very few exceptions, if you will. Actually, I'm gonna go back and forth between. For me, Jamal Murray made this list at number 7 is because simply, one, he really truly did have a really, really good season. Around 28 game, really good in terms of some playmaking opportunities. Let me rephrase. Really good in terms of considering he's playing with Jokic, arguably one of the best, if not the best playmaker in the league. He was still able to show off a lot of playmaking capabilities, still able to score at all 3 levels of the court. A guy who's not afraid of taking big shots in big moments. And he is the one exception when I say, yes, he had a really good regular season, I think if you just look at his regular season numbers and look like what he produced in the regular season, you can make the argument that any of these other point guards can be over him, and that's cool with me. But what he did in the playoffs and how much he elevated his game in the playoffs and stepped up in big, high leverage moments places him at 7 for me personally. Just for me personally. I can get why you think he might be an honorable mention, but I'm actually having Brunson at my 6th spot. So Brunson makes my 6th spot for me for 2 reasons. One, the Knicks desperately, and I mean desperately, needed a point guard. Brunson stepped in and fulfilled that role in terms of they were looking for a point guard over the last, honestly, 2-3 seasons. Went from Kemba. Kemba's the main guy that just popped in my head, and I literally can't think of the other point guards they had in the last 2-3 years. But my point still stands is that they desperately needed some solid point guard play, and I think they got that in Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson, to me, that series watching him against the Miami Heat, and once again, I know we're talking regular season, but that series watching him against the Miami Heat, he showcased in those games what he did all season. His ability to get to the basket. He has a great, in my opinion, a great mid-range floater game. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He helped Julius Randle, I think, get back on track. Like their team is talented. This New York team is talented. I think a lot of people realize that there's talent on this New York Knicks team, but there were a lot of these past 2-3 seasons where it was just up and down, a lot of inconsistencies, and a lot of that came from good point guard play. Tyrese Halliburton and Jalen Brunson, to me, had very similar effects on their teams, where they went to these young teams, some more talented than others in terms of the talent around them, but they went to these young teams that had talent with no direction, that were desperate need of point guards. Both those teams now have their point guards, and those point guards are thriving. So for me, Jalen Brunson makes number 6. Also, in my opinion, he exceeded the expectations that were put on him. A lot of people were wondering what he would look like. Coming off of that Dallas playoff run, everyone was calling the Knicks the mid-3 between him, Julius Randle, and RJ Barrett. They all got bags. And a lot of people were saying that it was an overpay for Jalen Brunson, that he should not have been to the Knicks. He shouldn't have got that bag. But like I said, he gave them a direction, showed up a lot. And the scoring talent, pull up threes, mid-range game at the rim. He really showed off his scoring talent this year, in my opinion. Shout out to Jalen Brunson. Because I wasn't a person who thought the Dallas playoff run was a fluke, but I was curious to see what he would look like without being able to play off of another primary ball handler. Becoming the primary ball handler versus playing off of a primary ball handler are 2 pretty different situations. And the play style is different. The mentality has to be different. And he stepped up to meet the challenge, and he had a great season. Number 5 is where I have Ja Morant. I went back and forth between him and the number 4 guy for a while. So if you have them swapped, I'm not mad at it. Ja Morant, outside of the very interesting off-court stuff he had going on, Ja Morant had a really good season. Like a really, really good season. Got to the rim with like some of the best in the league. The speed is there. The athleticism is there. His ability to finish at the basket is amazing. Does a great job of, I love him playing with, very similar to how Steven Adams played with Russell Westbrook is how Steven Adams plays with Ja Morant. Steven Adams gets spoon-fed a lot of easy buckets from Ja, like driving to the basket, dump off, driving to the basket. Ja might miss, get the offensive rebound, put it back up. The pick and roll game between Ja Morant and Steven Adams is, I don't want to say slept on, but it's not one that's talked about often, mainly because Steve isn't necessarily a hard roller. Like, he's the threat rolling down the basket, but he sets such good screens for Ja that Ja gets a full head of steam going to the basket, and it's very hard to stop him. And the one thing I'm looking forward to, when just not projecting, but looking forward to the rest of Ja's career and looking towards this season. Man, I didn't want to say it, but yeah, Kyrie low-key had a very, very good season. One of the things I'm looking forward to about Ja Morant when it comes to next season or his future or whatever, his athleticism, we've seen glimpses of it, but his athleticism allows him to do some really freaky things defensively. We've seen him go up with 2 hands and basically catch a shot, block a shot and stuff it on the rim and catch it. We've seen him jump in the air, do a 360 in the air and catch an inbounds pass to steal. Like, Ja Morant's speed, his jumping ability, his athleticism allowed him to do a lot of crazy things on the defensive side of the ball. I think he just has to commit more to that side of the basketball to want to be a good defender, because he has all the tools to be. He's still a little undersized, and not necessarily undersized. He's just a point guard, and point guards aren't big. But his athleticism could allow him to be a really, really good defender, and I hope he does do some of that. Yo, Hawk, what's good? I thought Shea would be counted as a point guard, though. That is a good point I meant to bring up at the beginning. SGA will be on my shooting guard list. The way I look at the Thunder, Giddey's their point guard. SJ, they'll be having to rock a lot, but Giddey's their point guard. SJ's the 2, so he will be on my 2-guard list. And spoiler alert, unless I do some drastic changes between this week, excuse me, unless I do some drastic changes between this week and next week, SJ is going to be really high on the shooting guard list. I'm just telling you now. At number 4 for point guards, this is where I have De'Aaron Fox. Swipe it a Fox. Hey, clutch player of the year, best perimeter. How can I phrase this? He's one of the best guys at finishing at the rim, and he's a point guard. regardless of position, regardless of size, regardless of whatever, he's one of the best, if not the best guy finishing at the rim. I was back and forth between him and Ja at this 4 and 5 spot. That's why I kind of got him in the same tier like this, is because I gave the nod to Fox's for his clutch play. Fox is clutch player of the year. He had either the most or the second most clutch points scored this season. He won a lot of games for the Kings in the regular season. They were in a lot of close games, and he stepped up moment after moment, night after night. He killed it. I loved what I saw from De'Aaron Fox this season. I'm looking forward to the Kings continuing to build, continuing to get better. They're going to have a target on their back a little bit more. Teams are going to be more prepared for him this season. I think they surprised a couple of teams, especially early in the season. By the second half of the season, people knew the Kings were good and were game planning against them. But I think now, going into this season, it'll be a real test to make sure, like, was this a fluke or are we really nice like this? And personally, I think they're really nice like this, and they'll figure it out. All right, we get into the top 3. So the top 2 and 3. Also, spoiler alert, let me just go ahead and touch on some of these other honorable mentions because they just ain't make the list. They ain't make it. Trae Young. So Trae Young ain't make the list. And I went back and forth in this a lot. Trae Young, I wrote it down. Let me go to it. I'm really split on Trae Young. The playmaking is phenomenal. Like, phenomenal. Most total assists, second in the league in assists per game. Harden was like 10.8. Trae Young was like 10.6, 10.4, something like that. But what lost it for me in terms of adding Trae Young to this top 10, and if he on your top 10, I'm not mad at it, but what lost it for me, because I know the skill is there, he just, to me, ain't performed at the level he could perform at. The shooting splits were down in terms of what he's done in the last couple of seasons, like way down in terms of what he's done in the last couple of seasons. The eye test for Trae Young, listen, if Trae Young got the ball in his hands, he's a great person to watch. He gonna get to the basket, he can dribble. If Trae Young does not have the ball in his hand, the Hawks are not fun to watch because he's not going to move that much. Defensively, he's one of the worst defenders in the league. And like I said, if he's on your list, that's cool. And this is why I say earlier in the beginning, Jrue Holiday was like an if for me. I got Jrue Holiday at 10. I was looking Jrue Holiday, Trae Young, Jrue Holiday, Trae Young, Jrue Holiday, Trae Young, and I went Jrue Holiday. I fully expect Trae to have a phenomenal season. If he can... I think there was just a lot going on when he figured out how to play with DeJounte Murray. I think he still didn't want to play with John Collins. They were getting acclimated to a new coach. Like, I just think there was a lot going on in Atlanta. Trae Young ain't make my list. Shoot the messenger. It is what it is. He ain't make my list. I'm not going to hold you. Horrible defense. I don't like saying horrible when I'm talking about players. Just really bad defensively. Really, really bad defensive. Nah, Trae ain't make the list. Trae's like the worst fit for the league. I'm not mad at that. The only thing Ja does better than Trae Young is jump, and the defensive gap isn't as lock. Ja going too. So I think the difference is for me, that's an excellent point. If you just want to compare Ja and Trae, the difference for me is, while the athleticism, yes, the athleticism is there. If Trae was the efficient levels that he had been in the previous seasons, he probably would have made this list. Trae Young was, I don't want to lie, but I remember looking at it and I was shocked. No. I'm going to sleazy. How did Tyrese make it a Trae did? I think Tyrese has a more, look, I said in the beginning, Tyrese is my favorite point guard on here, so that might be a little bit biased. It might be. So for what Trae Young does, right? I'm gonna break it down. This is my thought process. Trae Young's there to get assists and score. We know he's not going to defend at a high level. We know he kind of can get to the basket, but he's not known as a guy who's going to get to the basket and get a whole lot of free throws and like really put pressure on the rim, like a ton of pressure on the rim. Like, a lot of his free throws are midi, stop, pump fake, got you, like those type of free throws. Not necessarily, he do get to the rim, but not like the level like of a Ja, since we compare them. So if Trae Young is there to get assists and score, now granted, the assists he do, but his playmaking style is different than a guy like, I would even compare like to Tyrese Halliburton, in the sense of Trae Young's playmaking is, I held onto the ball mad long, now I'm getting it to you, you got like 2-3 seconds left, catch and shoot it. Whereas Tyrese, it feels like I'm hitting a cutter, stuff like that, and that might be more so a coaching scheme. Like, the Atlanta Hawks just don't run a lot of cuts and schemes like that, so Trae's forced to get assists in how he can in the system. But if Trae Young's strengths are shooting and scoring and taking a lot of shot attempts at a high volume, it's tough for me personally to value that when you're shooting 33% from three, 42% from the field. You start to float towards, and I'm not saying he is this, because I know he has the talent, and that's what I'm saying. He just had a really down year, in my opinion, because he has the talent. Trae Young last season was floating more towards shot chucker to me. He was putting up a lot of shots, like a lot of shots that just simply were not falling. They just weren't falling. He took less threes last season than he has in previous years, and he still shot his outside of his rookie season. He shot his worst season. This was his worst season in his career in terms of shooting efficiency. I like his game. I really, really do. When he hitting. I just think this last season was not it for him. In my opinion, last season was not it for him. And Chris saying Trae Young reminds me of Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady is interesting because there are plenty of seasons where I looked at Tracy McGrady and also gave shot chucker vibes. I ain't gonna hold you. So yes, it's not necessarily just his defense that kept him out of this list. The defense is a part of it. It's his crazy inefficiency for the role he is expected to play. He's expected to be a lot more efficient in that. And I think in the grand scheme of things, his inefficiency hurt his team. So he doesn't make my list. It's all good. All right. Back to the list. Does that make sense though, Sleazy? Does that kind of answer your question of explanation of why Trae ain't on my list? I love his game. Got a lot of love for him. He was number one on my honorable mentions list. And full transparency, yeah, I guess I understand. I just don't agree. And that's cool. That's really, really cool. You know what I mean? That's why I love talking hoops with people. And full transparency, Trae Young, Drew Holiday, Kyrie, and Tyrese, those four moved around a lot for me. There was one version of this list where Trae was on it and Kyrie was not. There was one version of this list, Tyrese Halliburton wasn't on it because I didn't like how many games he played, and Trae was on it. There was a game list where Drew wasn't on the list. So it took me a while to come to this conclusion. That's what, like, that bottom 3, 4 was tough for me. Was the toughest for me. Also not making the list. Like I said, we already talked about LaMelo Ball. Just injury, he ain't on the list. James Harden. Listen, he led the league in assists. I'm going to say average 24, 25 this season. I think it was closer to like 22 this season. Efficiency wasn't bad. I just, on a night-to-night basis, I liked it, but I ain't love what I saw from James Harden. So James Harden also ain't on the list. Darius Garland's not on the list. But we go ahead and get into it. Number 2 and number 3. 2 and 3. I went back and forth on these guys a lot. Let me scroll up to find it. Said, let me guess it. Hey man, you could try. You could try. Number 2, number 3, and number 1. 1, 2, and 3. I think 1 is pretty obvious. Well, I feel like 1 should be obvious. It might not be obvious to everybody, but I feel like 1 should be obvious. 2 and 3 is kind of obvious too. Dame and Luka is the only right answer. Steph number 1. 3 Dame, 2 Luka, 1 Steph. Hey, man's right. Number 3, I have Damian Lillard. I'm gonna talk about both of them because I want to explain it together because I think the seasons that these two guys had are very, very similar. For a while, for like 2 days, I had Dame at number 2. For like 2 days straight, I had Dame at number 2 because I'll be honest here, we're friends. Going into this season, I'm a believer now in Luka's game. Let me start off with that. I'm a believer now in his game. But going into the 2022-2023 season, be honest, I saw what people were seeing in Luka, but I didn't fully see what people were seeing in Luka. And the season that Luka had last year, 32, 8-8, some wild mess. It was ridiculous. And the playmaking was there. The reason initially I put Luka over Dame, I thought, I'm looking at the playmaking difference and I'm like, Luka's a better playmaker. And then I'm like, well, I got to put some respect on Dame because believe it or not, in my opinion, Dame's a decent playmaker. He's just not the level of playmaker that Luka is. Like Dame is a really good playmaker. If you look at his box score, you look at his stats, Dame's going to, I think last season he was 7-6 assists. Like Dame's not a bad playmaker. He really ain't. I just think the level of playmaker that Luka is, the level of passer that Luka is, the type of passes that Luka can pull off. Because when it comes to scoring, I think they're matched scoring wise. I think Dame's the better shooter. I think Luka has the bigger body, so he's able to get to the rim and have a little bit of a post fade game a little bit more. So those are some different intricacies in their game. But scoring for scoring, I'll take either of them in terms of just who's the better scorer. I think they're matched. Call me crazy. I think Damian Lillard is the only guy in the NBA who can shoot the type of threes that Steph Curry shoots at a consistent level. Like the terms of either the distance of three, the volume of threes, the type of threes, whether it be off the dribble, catch and shoot, running around. I think Dame's the only guy who can, I'll say match in quotation marks, because I still don't think he matches him, but the only guy he's the closest guy in the league, in my opinion, to the type of shooter that Steph Curry is. But I'm not mad at Dame being the third best point guard in the league. And which is, for me, it's more impressive because he's coming off of that abdominal surgery, that season where everybody was like, yo, was Dame washed? The 2021-2022 season where he leaves midway through the season, gets the abdominal surgery. But leading up to that, those first like 2 months of the season, everybody's like, what's wrong with Dame? Is Dame washed? Is it over for him? Is his career on a downturn? He had that surgery. Now, the team was still trash. They didn't win nothing. The team was still trash. But he proved that, no, I'm still nice. I'm still top 3 point guard in the league. That's why he's like, I want out out of Portland because I'm clearly good enough to contribute to a team that can win a championship if you got the right pieces around. So I'm not mad at this. I'm not mad at giving Luka the nod over Dame, but it's also like mind-boggling to me that Luka in year five, that Luka in year 5 has solidified himself as a top 3 point guard in the NBA is extremely impressive. It is extremely, extremely impressive. His ability to play at his own pace. He can score at all 3 levels. His vision, Luka's vision is up there with Jokic, Bron, Tyrese, Luka. Like, Luka's top 5 passer in the league, in my opinion. For real, for real. If Dame didn't get hurt, he might have been 2. I'm not mad at that. It's tough, but I'm not mad at that. How does Trey give you shot chucker vibes and Luka doesn't? Excellent question. All right, I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at that question, Sleazy. Let me pull it up because I remember what I saw earlier, but I need to find it again. What put me here? This is the difference between me for Trey and Luka. So Luka, how can I put this? His 3 sometimes give me shot chucker vibes. Luka was 34% from 3 this past season. Trey was 33. They both shot like 8 threes a game. So that's low key shot chucker vibes. The difference for me is Luka in the mid range. Luka's mid-range game isn't shot chucker. Luka's mid-range game is effective scoring. Luka's getting to the basket is effective scoring. Luka's 2s are great, and he puts up a lot of 2s. He puts up a decent amount of like back to the basket stuff, decent amount of mid-range pull-ups, fades. His mid-range game is very polished, very clean. I wish he was a slightly better 3-point shooter. He's a 34% last year, which is league average. Like, it ain't bad. That's league average. But the reason and the difference between Luka and Dame in terms of shot chucker vibes, it might just be play style. It might be some weird bias I can't get through and get over, because I was going to say I like Luka as a playmaker more than I like Trey as a playmaker, but Trey's also a really good playmaker. I think Trey just has to settle for his shots feel more under the rest than Luka's. And it might be because Luka plays at his own pace. It might be because Luka has the bigger body, and so he's able to body people off of him. That's something I'm gonna have to sit with. Trey's still not making my list. Like, it ain't gonna make me change it, but that is a very, very valid question. I have picked Luka for MVP the last 2 years, and I'm not stopping. The thing that's holding Luka back from MVP contention, like in my opinion, like real MVP contention, is he has to get more regular season wins. He just simply has to get more regular season wins. Obviously, that needs number 1. I put him in a tier by himself because as great as I think Luka is, as great as I think Dame is, I think it's still pretty clear that Steph Curry is the best point guard in the NBA. Talk about a guy who's low-key similar to Kyrie in terms of like his ability to score at all 3 levels, be super efficient, be real slithery, get to the basket, can finish around the rim, finish over defenders, can put the, you know, he's very similar to Kyrie in the sense of like he has a stupid layup package. We all talk about Kyrie's layup package all the time, but Steph has a very low-key, stupid layup pack. It don't get highlighted as much because a lot of Steph's highlights are his crazy threes, dribble, 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 and I mean, shoot it, turn around in your face, all that in the third. But when Steph gets to the basket, he's one of the better guard finishers in the league. So my official point guard list, based on last season, I got Steph Curry, Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard, De'Aaron Fox, Ja Morant, Darius Garland, Jamal Murray, Tyrese Halliburton, Kyrie Irving, and Drew Holiday. The Trae Young one might be a little controversial because Trae Young was like 3, 4 on my list last year, and now he ain't even making it. But the point guard position is deep. The point guard position is very, very deep. The iffiest pick in my book is this Drew one, but I value 2-way play, and Drew's the only 2-way point guard that, in my opinion, is still at least also good offensively. He's the only good 2-way point guard left. Like, truly good 2-way point guard left.